Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees, which brings together diverse and unique voices from around the world to share their stories. If you like today's episode, remember to give us a like, subscribe, and leave a review. Here's your host, David Shunk.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees. I'd like to welcome you all this evening. We're here with Masha Schmitt from Massachusetts. Massachusetts. Hello, Masha. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So, Masha, why don't you just tell us about yourself a little bit, and we'll go from there.
Sure thing. So by trade, I am an opera singer in training. I do dance as a passion, and I am a cultural enthusiast, just overall.
So, opera singing. Can you gonna sing for us this evening? No, it's okay. You don't have to. I will say that's impressive, though. Do you perform for? I'm sorry, I'm not like a professional at this of acoustics or theater. Do you perform for a company or is it personal? Or kind of tell me about that.
Sure. So right now, I'm in school getting my bachelor's in music, where for the most part, people in my degree, in vocal performance degree, usually end up with some sort of a company. For me, I plan on doing some working. I'd like to experience working with a company and that kind of a thing, but kind of the end goal for me is more of teaching voice privately with the knowledge I gained through my career. Um, but yeah, no, a lot of people do go just like they find a company to sing with, they focus there. Um, some people don't end up, even if they get a vocal performance classical degree, that is, they might end up more in the musical theater realm or the jazz realm, kind of anything like that. So it's really person to person. But for me, I would like to do some company work as well as just kind of having my own voice studio and teaching.
Nice. Do you see yourself staying in Massachusetts?
Honestly, I am not sure where, like which country I really see myself, because I kind of love everything about all of the other countries and what they have to offer as well. Um, but at least for a little while, I will definitely be staying in the kind of Connecticut, Massachusetts area since I go to school down in Connecticut.
Right. I'm just trying to think of best well-known city in the U.S. for opera. I mean, of course, everyone would think New York City, of course, but I know Russia, they compete pretty well with opera over there too, so we'll get into
Oh,
that in
for
a
sure.
minute.
Mhm.
Yeah, so let's talk about your adoption story. Why don't you tell us in your own words a little bit about it, where you're adopted from and kind of where you are with that stage of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, the children's home or детский dom is in Kalozhice, is in the Leningradsky Oblast. But I was born in Volosovo, which is also in that kind of area. Um, and that's kind of locationally. For me, I was born in 2003, adopted in 2005 at 2 years, 9 months. And so at that point, I spoke some Russian. And so, kind of the main thing that for me became really important was speaking Russian and keeping my heritage, which I later found out that kind of just through finding out my last name, which is Ilchenko, it is a Ukrainian last name. So I, to some degree, have to be Russian Ukrainian, which definitely led into a whole new world of like learning that some of that culture, getting into that culture, as well as keeping up. So probably for like the majority of the first half of my life, it was mostly just like, oh, I'm Russian, and then the second half, it was like, oh, well, I'm Russian Ukrainian, and kind of started getting into that. So yeah, kind of just figuring out who I am.
It sounds like the best of both worlds, Ukrainian and Russian. Yeah, I actually kind of have a similar story in figuring out that my biological father's side was Ukrainian, further down the road. So that's pretty cool. Um, so said you were adopted in 2004, born
That's not
2005, and you were born
yes.
2002? 3. Okay, sorry, I was off by a year.
Oh,
But wow,
all
you're
good.
you're really you're sizing me up on my age a little bit, but because I was born in 92, 94, 1994. But anyway, so okay, so you were adopted from Russia, and you have not been back yet. Is that correct?
I have actually.
Oh, well, we have to hear about this part then.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I was 10, I went back and I visited St. Petersburg, Moscow, and I actually went back to my children's home and I visited there too. So my mom and she adopted me as a single mother for reference. So when we went back, we stayed actually in the same apartment that we had stayed in at the time of my adoption in old St. Petersburg, the older section that is, which is pretty cool. And I also, the year that I went back was right after Russia banned Americans and possibly, I don't know if it was others, but it was Americans at least from adopting from Russia. So a little awkward for sure. But at least I was able to obviously go back as visiting. Uh, and I
So you
was,
stayed in the apartment that your adoptive mother stayed at when she was going through the process with you. Now that is something that's pretty impressive. And you were
yeah,
just so young. I assume you don't have many or any memories. Yeah. No.
yeah, unfortunately, no.
Yeah.
And actually, because Russia had banned Americans, the woman who had worked in the adoption agency with my mom, like at that time worked with my mom through the agency. She had lost her job, but my mom had stayed in contact with her, and so she was able to arrange the rental of the same apartment. And her daughter Katya agreed to be our tour guide for very little through St. Petersburg, and as well as going back to the Детский the orphanage. And so we were able to kind of see all of these really beautiful places like Ekaterinburg, the Petergov, just places in St. Petersburg. We went to a museum. So I mean, so many museums. One of them was like an ethnographic museum on costumes, which I found fascinating. But we spent a week there, and then we also went to Moscow, which was also very beautiful. Um, but yeah, no, it was wonderful, and it was really interesting visiting the orphanage specifically because when I had gone, it was this rundown, cockroaches and not painted walls and definitely like mold and children lined up against the wall with beds and just very poor.
That sounds terrible. You're not really
But
painting the red carpet there.
that's how it was when I was there. But I
Right,
went back
right.
and they had computers and they had painted colorful walls and clearly like they had gotten some sort of funding, either governmental or private, and were able to really just upgrade it. And I almost had this momentary like, dang, I missed the I missed the upgrade, which is kind of comical. But it was wonderful. We actually saw a ballet in St. Petersburg as well. We saw Giselle at the Alexandrinsky Theater, and it was fantastic. But
I bet it
yeah,
was. Yeah, that's awesome. That's so
it
cool.
was such a great 2 weeks. I loved every moment for sure.
Yeah, and the food there is incredible.
Oh, so facts.
Oh, I know. So I have to ask, between St. Petersburg and Moscow, which city do you kind of like better? Probably where, I think I know the answer, but I want to hear
St.
what you.
Petersburg.
Yeah, I figured. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool
Yeah,
though. That's really awesome. Well, I'm sure your adoptive mother was blown away, staying in the same place. That I'm sure that brought back a lot of memories.
for
And
sure.
it would be
Mhm.
really so, but the fact that you guys got to bond that way, that's something
Mhm.
special. And my adopted mom and I went back to Russia together as well, so I can relate with you in a lot of that. So
Mhm.
it's nice to have that support there in case you need it. And the fact that it sounded like was pretty open about exploring it with you and all that. So did you grow up always knowing you were adopted? And
Yeah,
okay.
I have quite an unusual story in that
Yeah.
case where
Sure, sure. Okay.
I grew up being very aware of where I was from and just kind of who I was on that end. Where I came to America from Russia. I still, at that point, I was speaking Russian. My mother didn't speak very good Russian, And so she had seen that I started losing my Russian. And so she literally, through childcare, my pediatrician, and through literally getting me a Russian teacher, kept me fluent. And to this day, I'm still fluent. And so like she is an
Seriously, you're
absolute,
fluent?
I'm fluent.
Good for
Right. Like
you.
I can read, I can write, I can sing.
Молодец.
So much.
Пожалуйста.
But it's all because of my mom in that end. I mean, sure, to once I got older, it was my decision, which I chose to keep speaking, but it was her powerhouse of just getting different babysitters, and actually kind of a family lineage of babysitters. Kind of funny, where my first Russian babysitter was between transferring colleges, and when she went back, her mother took over taking care of me. And then when her mother couldn't anymore, her the mother's sister also took care, like all like totally
It's
got
like you
involved in
had
that Russian family.
your adopted mom when she got you, you didn't know that you were being adopted into a whole other Russian family too over in the US practically.
I mean, absolutely. I was definitely very much involved in the Russian community in my area. I mean, thankfully the Boston area and my more like sort of east central Mass area has very strong Russian communities, or at least it had much stronger when I was growing up than now. But I mean, it was luck, it was location. I did so much to keep my language. My Russian teacher Liana worked with me for years, and still through college. Now that I'm in college, we when I can, I didn't in the fall semester, but in the spring semester, I started going to her again just to kind of keep it up, and reading, and just really getting maintaining was is kind of where I'm at. But it's been a really special, I think, just journey for me, because not everyone can be like, oh yeah, I'm adopted from Russia and I have no ties there, but I'm still fluent.
Yeah, no, that's really impressive. You know, we have so many adoptees that are adopted from Russia that come here, lose the language. Some never want to relearn it. Some try, but it's too hard, and others relearn it and then don't speak it, the best. I'm one of them. But that's just awesome that your adoptive mother really played a big, big role in helping you maintain that culture side of you and that self of identity. And that's something that we like to ask about and talk about identity and adoption and what you believe and get your thoughts on all that. And this is really cool, and I think a lot of people are going to be interested in this and seeing your perspective. So, when, for example, we have adoptees that, they may struggle with identity, right? And questioning about, how Russian or Ukrainian they really are if they can't speak it. Now, your story is definitely different. So, what's your reaction to that? How would you, I guess, answer someone if they said, "Do you think I'm Russian, but I can't speak the language?" What would you say?
I mean, I also kind of have a lot to kind of say on that, but to kind of keep that as a slightly shorter response of, I mean, yeah, it's really easy to feel disconnected from your birth culture, sorry. And like, you are, if you were born there, even if you don't speak it, even if you don't have people that there, that is still who you are. And that if you kind of feel that disconnect, is like learning about it, investigate it, get to know your roots, especially if you feel alienated. Which I even doing my Ukrainian dance, having done some Russian folk dance, knowing the Russian culture and being raised in, like, even with that, I do identify very strongly as Russian. But I too get to points where I feel alienated. But being able to find your way back, kind of, to learning about it and finding your sense of belonging in your heritage, I think is just, it's really helpful. And I think it's just something, I think that everyone, if they want, even I guess people who aren't adopted, just in general, like, if you don't know much, learning about your culture, learning about your heritage, I think it's so important. And yeah, no, I am very lucky with kind of where I ended up and having so much cultural connection
Yeah,
in that.
no, that's really big. Like, I mean really big. And I'm not trying to keep asking you the same question over and over about it, but it's just really fascinating because we really don't get many stories from adoptees like yours. It's always the other way around. You know, they're desperate for culture. They're desperate to learn the language, and sometimes they get adopted into families where the parents, you know, maybe not support them 100% in wanting to do a lot of things Russian related. I mean, you know, but your story is definitely different. And I know you started to talk about your involvement with Russian folk dancing and all this, and you said you had a lot to tell us. So let's dive into that. How did that all begin? I want to know.
Yeah, sure. So, this kind of goes back into kind of like the whole b- being brought up and all of that, where um I had the people who babysat me, and through them, they found someone else who kind of got me involved in the Russian community in my area. And I started to get to know those people, and there was this Russian folk dance group, which I dance many other things beyond Russian folk dance, which I don't do anymore. I only did it for, I want to say, like a couple of years. I think it was maybe year and a half, too.
Okay.
But in that community, they started as kind of like a Russian folk dance thing, and it was fun. And it was definitely like more than anything, more than like, oh, having skill or technique or whatever. It was just getting connected with your culture. And that's what I really enjoyed about it, as well as just getting to get to know Russian kids as well, like Russian American kids being like, yeah, even though I'm my American mother may not, you might have Russian parents, we're the same. There isn't like a separation in that sense. And so for me, I grew up so much in music, and thankfully that's kind of like what I found to be as one of the most international forms of communication is music. And now I study it as a, plan on making it my whole life because I love it. But I did that, and when I found out about the Ukrainian thing, I started going to Ukrainian kind of like a summer camp, and then I found through one of the directors of that this like kind of Ukrainian workshop, and now I'm in this Ukrainian folk dance troupe in Hartford, in the Hartford area, and it's just, yeah, no, I'm really glad that I was able to find, not only just through like cultural things, but also through things that resonate just with me as a person, the music, and just getting kind of into that, where I grew up with my Russian teacher who had her end of the year kind of like performance with all of her students, where I always sang something. Sometimes I recited poem by one of the Russian poets, usually with Pushkin. But
Yeah, I've heard that a few times.
so much Pushkin.
Yep.
But like doing that and singing through that, and I I took piano lessons from her for a while until I realized that I'm not the biggest fan of piano practice. Can do choral and singing, but piano is not quite as
Yeah,
a favorite.
I did
But
piano, but hey, no complaints here. I'm not offended, don't worry. So,
totally, I have to do it in school now, so I'm thankful that I did take the lessons because I'm able to kind of use my ear and such, as well as like music reading skills and such. But
right.
yeah, no, I mean, being involved through my Russian teachers, kind of the community that she built, and then just the one that existed for the people on like a kind of wider spread of like people from different towns. And something kind of cool that I guess I'll share about is that there is this program called Star Talk, which is, I believe it's some sort of government run through the part of I forget what it's called, but it's the department that does like translating and just like that kind of work. They run this heritage cultural program. I don't know if they still do now since COVID, but I took it. I did it the summer after my freshman year in high school. I did the Russian one at Harvard in Boston. And it was this program for people who grew up with their Russian heritage, and you had to speak it. And so I got into the program and came in to meet all these people who had Russian parents and were like, super Russian in that sense, where they spoke it, they had parents at home. And I came in with, I didn't have Russian parents at home, but I still spoke it, and it was just a really cool experience to kind of, because I got to take different classes and do different kind of projects that were really Russian based, and just kind of digging into that culture, which I was really lucky to get to do for that summer.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm sure the other Russian students there were definitely surprised.
For sure. I think we ended up taking kind of like it was like the Russian ACT, sort of like that kind of a thing. It wasn't the ACT, but it was like that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I forget what it's called, but I ended up like scoring pretty decently, and I was kind of like shocked with that my, fluency really carried through. Yeah, I mean, I keep saying this, but I'm definitely very fortunate for.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so cool. What was your favorite course from that experience at Harvard?
I really enjoyed the art one because got to kind of that was we didn't there were kind of like multiple ones, and you didn't always necessarily get to do all of them, but you got to find out about them. But one of the ones that I did was the art one, and I really enjoyed it because we got to talk about kind of different styles of painting, and even if it wasn't necessarily about Russian painters, which we also did talk about, it was just talking about it in Russian, and it was kind of the grammatical building of being able to talk about slightly more complex topics that are a bit niche, I guess, than to just a regular like conversational Russian.
Yeah,
Um,
that so you got
but
to like talk about the colors and the like
yeah,
the piece of art that you're describing, but you're basically speaking it in Russian very descriptively, pretty much.
exactly. Talking about what kind of art it is, like what era it's from, and like talking about the painter, and talking about, the stylistic decisions and that kind of thing. I mean, it was a really wonderful program. But yeah, I had a lot of fun.
That is awesome. Yeah, my artistic abilities start and end with stick figures. So we're not even gonna
Totally
bother then.
fair.
Yep,
Uh,
not gonna go there, but that is just really really cool. I mean, I didn't even know Harvard even offered that. Or
I
like these
mean,
I mean, I've heard of like Russian programs like that. I was in college up in Burlington, Vermont. I attended Champlain, but right next to Champlain was University of Vermont, and they had a Russian major and a whole Russian department and language department. So
which is kind of funny that you mentioned that,
yeah,
because when I was applying, I had gone to this school and sat in with the Russian professors, and they all seemed really interested. I was fully planning on majoring in Russian. And then the at the point that I started applying, their program started to disintegrate. And so, because there was no Russian program, there was no reason for me to continue looking at UVM, because I was really interested in their Russian program. But yeah,
wow,
no,
yeah,
absolutely.
they have the Russia house and everything, and yeah,
Yeah.
I but they're great people. They helped back when my Russian was spotty going through college. I had a teacher as well, and they helped a lot with translating services and stuff. They were just very friendly people, really willing to help us, which was
Absolutely.
nice. Yeah,
That's so
that,
great.
that's awesome. So, wow, so you got all that experience now. Um, let's talk about information that you have about Russia. Did you get your medical history? What do you have and what don't you have?
So basically, all I have is my mother's name and her eldest daughter's possible probable name, um, which is also a kind of interesting topic. That, yeah, she's got a older daughter, um, but all I know is very little, basically. Um,
Okay.
I mean, yeah. Limited.
Have you tried to dive into finding more information out, or are you interested in that?
Yeah, I mean, I've looked into it. I have a better idea of kind of like what it would take to get a private investigator, and kind of finding out about that, because I do have a lot of interest, and you know, even if I were to, get the private investigator and do all of that, I'm also, to some degree prepared for either my birth mother to not want to, even say that I'm hers, or all of, because, it's not always a fairy tale ending. Like, I'm prepared for that, but I definitely have a lot of interest, and I want to know more, especially because I, like, and not very many years ago, found out that I have an older sister. I would love to meet the older sister, or, at the bare minimum, I would like to have some medical history.
Yeah,
'Cause
no, that's it's
yeah.
definitely important. So the older sister that you have and you found that was on the documents, is that older sister adopted as well, or still in Russia? Do you know, or do you not? You're not sure?
I actually have no idea. I mean,
Oh,
all I
okay.
really know was that my mom was around 17 when I was born and that she already had an older daughter, and at that point, I had been put up for adoption, but since then, I have no idea. I have no idea if she ended up also putting my older sister or if she has more kids now or anything. I don't unfortunately, I don't know. I would love to know, but yeah, unfortunately, knowledge is limited.
Okay. Well, yeah, there's definitely options out there,
Mhm.
and people that are willing to help, and I can even give you some recommendations at another time if you'd like. Uh,
Absolutely, sure.
so some suggest, I mean, just right at the bat, check out the social networking sites for sure. The two big Russian ones, VK and OK, those
I
ones
have
will get you. Oh, you have? Okay, good.
I have looked down those,
All
yeah.
right. Well, we'll get there.
Yeah. For
um,
sure.
so I'm curious. So since you already been back to Russia, um, did you travel as an American citizen or a Russian citizen?
I do have dual citizenship, but I'm, like, almost positive that I traveled on my American citizenship, like, with my American passport, that is.
So do you? Oh, okay. That's odd, uh, because it's always been illegal, really, because Russia views you as a citizen for life. So you're only supposed to enter and leave the country on a Russian passport. So that's why I was just curious. Um,
I might have left on the
so
I
you
can't.
you kept your Russian passport up to date for sure.
Yeah. Yes. I know for a fact that I still have my dual citizenship and that I'm pretty sure that was kind of a conversation that my mom had had where it was like, well, you might need to do that all on your American because if you do it on your Russian, such and such could maybe happen and we want to avoid that. And so I was like, okay, because I was 10, so I wasn't, you know.
Right, pretty young, makes sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow, that's just amazing. So let's talk about we talked about, the culture side of it. Let's dive into deeper a little bit on the whole adoption side. What's your, it sounds like your adoption's been great. Don't get me wrong, but what's your overall view of adoption? I mean, you're looking back on it and you're reflecting on, you know, your story and maybe what happened being raised in the US, but you got to keep on to your culture. I guess what's your view on adoption? Do you think your overall experience has been positive so far, or were there any bumps in the road?
I mean, I don't know. It's a loaded question for sure. Um, I I've had a very interesting life where there have been ups and downs with just things in general unrelated to the adoption. So my life has been definitely an interesting one, but I think that adoption is so important and like I think that it should be available always to every country to like no matter like I think that when they made it no longer possible for Americans to adopt from Russia, it made just that so much like it isolated so many more orphans that could have maybe have had families, and it's unfortunate, but I'm very glad that I got adopted, and I think that I think that I'm probably will end up adopting and kind of something that I need to look more into, but I mean, I would even love adopting from Russia, and because I still have my Russian citizenship, maybe I could, but
Yeah, I
yeah.
was I was thinking the same thing actually, and there has to be a loophole because even if you have Russian citizenship and you have a passport, it just says you live abroad as a citizen. So you could just use that. I don't know. I'm not a legal expert, so don't don't quote me on that one. But that's
No
that's
worries. Yeah.
that's cool that you are so positive about it. I mean, you always get cases of some people leaning more on the negative side, and I guess if you had a message for them, what would you say? Deep question, I know.
I know, I'm like, oof,
Yeah,
okay.
so it's okay. I mean, it's hard because when you have such a positive experience, and I can relate to this with you, it's hard to even imagine someone could be negative and not have it. Because in reality, we want, everyone to have a great experience like we did, right? But that's not, but if we're being practical, that's definitely not always the case. You have people who get adopted into families that maybe they're not as nice as the adoptive family as we would have wanted them to be, or they weren't as accepting in their Russian side, or they got scared when they said they want to go find their birth family. Um, there's so many different obstacles, but I'm just kind of curious, do you have any tips for people that are kind of negative about it?
I mean, if I'm being totally honest, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for me. So I'm kind of, that answer kind of hits a little bit where I'm like, ooh, what would I say? I mean, kind of like, I'm gonna need a second to think of this. I'm like, what do I?
No, that's fine. Don't worry if you don't have an answer. That's fine right now.
I
We
mean,
can.
I have an answer. I guess I'm just trying to form the sentences.
Okay. Yeah.
It can be really difficult and it can feel really isolating,
Yeah.
and it's gonna be hard, and it's gonna be unfair, but worst comes to worst, sometimes you just have to wait it out till you're an adult, and it sucks and it's unfair, but keeping whatever knowledge you can obtain, and keeping kind of just that internal strength of being like, I will get to find something out, even if it's very, very minimal, and kind of keeping that hope is, I think, where I would say is that in general, if it was the situation that you were adopted into a maybe a not so nice family, or one that struggles with, whatever, just kind of like it will get better. And I know that that's, it's almost a cliche thing to say where it's like it doesn't feel like it, but eventually things will get better. And, getting help through like mental health professionals or whatever, because there are people who have gotten education and training and learning about how to help us, because it can be really hard and it is isolating, and it making sure to find that community and finding people. And I mean, I think that this is one of the things that I almost would say struggled the most with, which is like even on an adoptive level of like that found family and like finding your family. And it doesn't need to be the one you're related to by blood. It doesn't need to be even the one who adopted you. It's who you believe is family, and holding on to them and holding them close. And that is my best advice, is know that you aren't alone, even if it can feel lonely and it can feel stressful and overwhelming, and that knowing that you'll get through it, and you'll find out what you can when you can.
That's a beautiful answer. Yeah. No, I mean, that was a loaded question, but you did a great job. That was a loaded response.
Yeah.
So think of it that way. That's really nice, though. So you have any plans of wanting to go back to Russia? I know now is probably not the ideal time, but maybe 10 years down the road, have you thought about returning since you were younger?
Absolutely. I mean, originally the plan was that kind of my mom had this kind of vision where it's like I went back the first time, and the hope was that maybe after I graduated high school we'd go back again. And then, at that point it was the pandemic hitting, and then it was the war and all of that, but I absolutely want to go back. And yeah, I want to go back. I want to, even
What?
if it's not to find my birth family, just for myself, because I definitely kind of have this imaginary sort of vision in my head of what I'm seeing, even from when I went back from when I was 10. I want to kind of re-solidify
Yeah,
those.
what would you want to see that's what's new? Yeah, I guess if you went back again, what new things would you like to see, or what would you like to revisit?
Well, I definitely want to go back to St. Petersburg, and that'll probably be the main area that I go. Um, and I don't know, kind of getting more into the history of it, in that sense of like just in general of like Russia and all of that. And just, I mean, at some point I'd love to since I know that I am Russian Ukrainian, if that's ever becomes a possibility, I'd love to go to Ukraine and just kind of be able to see, because I do have just a general imaginatory kind of idea of all of that, and I would love to just, I don't know, kind of find myself.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. That's awesome. So growing up in Massachusetts, Connecticut area, have you met other adoptees, or it doesn't have to be just Russia, just people who are adopted in general?
Yeah, actually, kind of ironically, I know someone who I grew up with who was adopted from the same kind of oblast as me. And then otherwise, I've met a bunch of people who are adopted just like in general, not necessarily from Russia. But it's always an interesting conversation, and it always ends up going into like self-identity and kind of that general direction is usually where it goes. So yeah.
Yeah. What has your experience been when people ask about adoption? What's usually the first thing they want to know about it, or at least about your story?
Well, usually they ask if I remember anything, or they ask if, sometimes I'll get the question of, do you want to like go back? As in, like, do I literally want to go back, or do I, like, kind of just like my point of view is, I think, really what they really try to ask about. And I don't know. I mean, you definitely, you understand, and it's always good to kind of talk to people who are adopted, because there's just a kind of just a certain level of just, I don't even know how to explain it. Like, it's just
It's like almost a
no one else
level
gets
a
it.
level of comfort, and yeah, like you said,
Exactly.
no one else that's absolutely what I was gonna say. I was
Yeah,
gonna Yeah, no, that's perfect. Do you think there's a stigma against adopted children?
absolutely. Um, I mean, I definitely got bullied growing up because people would say things, sometimes even completely inaccurately, like about a different country, where I'm like, that's not where I'm from. Or they like, or they say something like something stupid along the lines of like, go back to where you came from or whatever. And it's like, I mean, all the hate is always, unfortunately, at one point or another comes around. And I don't know. I mean, the best way is to say they don't get it.
Yeah,
But
well, yeah, and you're like, yeah, you described it beautifully. There's always going to be something like that. There's always going to be someone else with a comment that may not be positive, and you just kind of have to take it for what it is and say, all right, they just don't understand, and that's the truth.
yeah,
And as long as you're comfortable with your story and where you're from and who you are, I think at the end of the day, that's really all that matters.
yeah, absolutely.
So I'm curious about if you were to find your family in Russia, what would you want to know?
Bare minimum, medical information would be good, because this has been a mystery.
Yeah, I actually didn't even know my blood type until about a year ago. My whole life just never had to do it. It was never taken from me, or found out I was A positive. I'm like, oh, that's cool. It's actually a big deal. Little things like that for adopted people.
Literally,
Yeah.
I don't even remember. I mean, my mom knows, and I think I've been told maybe once before, but it's, I'm so used to just saying unknown, or NA, not applicable. Like, I mean, bare minimum is medical history. And like, probably the furthest, I mean, if it was like, the fairy tale story of, you find the parents or the parent, and they're like, oh my goodness, and welcome you back into their life with open arms, I don't even know if I would want that, to be completely honest, because I have built a life for myself where I am. And maybe I'd want, be able to like not be totally uninvolved with them, but I'm not gonna, pretend to show up 17 years later, or 18 year whatever it is later, and be like, oh yeah, no, I'm back. Like, it's not going to be like that. And I think that's
Yeah, show up after 18 years. Hey, mom, is my bed still here? Oh, oops. Too soon for jokes now, but I understand what you're saying though. Yeah. But I mean, bare minimum sometimes is even hard to get, and there's a big struggle with people adopted like us that, how do we accept the fact that we may not know certain things for the rest of our lives? I mean, I'm sure that eats away at every adopted person. There's always one thing that they're going to wish they had, or one more thing, or more details, or more facts. And sometimes you
Always.
just have to say, when's enough, or when are you going to be satisfied? And I think that's hard for people to come to terms with.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely get that. Knowing that I have an older sister, and there's always the like, oh, well, why did she keep her and not me? And that kind of thing. I mean, it used to really, really bother me. And it sometimes, it really upset me to think about it and how, like, because, like, for me, I know that I was 9 months when my mom put me into the orphanage. And so it's like, and so it's just kind of like, like you get this mix of like I get how difficult that was, and it is the most difficult decision anyone can ever make. But also, then at the same time, you'll have your momentary of like, well, how could someone, make that decision? But it's so much back and forth, and I think that like for me, how I've made peace with even if I find out absolutely nothing is just choosing not to let it stop me from finding out who I am now and kind of like being able to almost like a being able to move on thing rather than being caught up in like the past, the history where I'd love to know. But if I never know, I know who I am. And I think that that is, at least for me right now, I'm happy with that. And I can, you know, be happy with that.
Well, that's a really good thing, and to be happy about who you are, that's where everyone wants to be. So that's that sounds like you already are there, which is awesome. I just have a couple questions left for you. Have you ever
Absolutely.
dealt, or I guess, played around with the whole ancestry or 23andMe? I know a lot of people like to do that. Did you ever do that, or have any thrill of getting anything from it?
I've I have never done it and I kind of want to do it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like where I'm like, well, maybe I'll find out that I'm half this or part that or, whatever. And I mean, there's always the question of like, oh, well, how can they know? How is it so accurate or is it accurate? And it's, so, I mean, like, if I ever get to a point where I can just, throw $200 on that type of a thing, I might for sure. Just almost if nothing more than for shits and giggles, just to find out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of adoptees that ended up doing the 23andMe, and they actually found biological relatives that were adopted and signed up for it in the U.S. and were able to connect that way. So definitely a thought. Um,
Mhm.
so my final question for you, or I guess my final statement to you would be, why don't you leave everyone with your last thoughts? Maybe it could be advice or suggestions or anyone that's listening and wants to know, what does Masha from Massachusetts want to tell me that I can take away from this?
Finding out who you are or where you're from, even when you find out, might you might think that it's gonna solve whatever thing, and if it doesn't, also that's okay, and if it does, that's great, and just even if you never find out, being able to identify with who you are and what makes you happy has to be the most important. And if not finding out is making you unhappy and that just keeps you in this unhappy state, finding some other way to just be happy with existence is just the most important, I think.
I love it. That's that's amazing. Your story really is one of a few, I will say that. But I thank you so much for sharing all the information. Thank you for coming on tonight and talking and letting us all into your side of the story. And um, I'm sure you're going to definitely convince people to find out who they are and maybe inspire some people to go listen to some opera later or something. I mean, the Russians are known for that, so
I do that music.
that's true. That's true. Well, thank you so much again for coming on, sharing. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you. I'd love to follow up with you. If there's any new information or you find anything you want to come back on and share it, just let us know. I'll be sure to reach out later, send you some resources if you are curious about looking for your family or anything like that. But thank you so much again. It really means a lot that you came on tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for
Ab-
making this space.
no problem. Absolutely. That was Masha Schmitt from Massachusetts, everyone. Thank you again for tuning in at another episode of Voice of Adoptees. The episode will be airing every Tuesday and Wednesday morning. You can find Masha's episode on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and our website at voiceofadoptees.com. If you're interested in knowing anyone adopted, you want to share your story or let them know, they can share their story. Let us know. Come find us. As always, we're here to help. Voice of Adoptees. Who am I?
Thanks for listening to Voice of Adoptees. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. See you next time.